The Mafia Don spoke in Arabic, and only the black waitress replied, silencing the table of Capos. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into today's story. The air in the restaurant was thick with tension. The evening crowd had gathered, dressed in their finest, talking in hushed tones while the silverware gleamed under the soft, ambient lighting. In the back corner, a long table was set up, where the most powerful men in the city sat. Members of the Mafia, their faces serious, eyes never leaving their glasses of wine. The Mafia Don, Dante Romano, sat at the head of the table, his sharp features illuminated by the low light. His presence commanded respect, as always. But this evening, there was something different about him. He had a sharp, calculating look in his eyes, as if he was sizing up every single person in the room. As he leaned back in his chair, he spoke in a deep, calm voice, the kind of voice that had built an empire. His words, flowing in rapid Arabic, carried an air of authority that could silence anyone who heard it. The others at the table shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at one another, unsure of what to do. The Mafia, the most feared men in the city, were now unsure of how to respond to their leader. Among them, only one person didn't seem intimidated. Lena, the black waitress, was moving between the tables, carefully balancing plates and drinks, trying to keep a low profile. She had been working at the restaurant for months now, a quiet, diligent worker, always doing her job with grace. But tonight, as soon as she heard the Mafia Don speak in Arabic, something stirred in her. She had grown up hearing Arabic from her father, a language that had once been her lifeline, a bond to her roots. Lena had never expected it would be useful in a place like this, serving drinks in a high-end restaurant for a table of ruthless mobsters. But the words that Dante spoke hit a nerve. She paused for a moment, just for a second, as the tension in the room built. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding, but she didn't back down. The others at the table shifted uncomfortably, but Lena felt a pull, something inside of her urging her to speak. As the room grew tense, Dante's gaze shifted to her. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. He didn't look away. The others at the table, the powerful men, all turned to see what was happening. They didn't know it yet, but the power dynamics in the room were about to shift dramatically. With a deep breath, Lena spoke, her voice steady, almost defiant as she replied in perfect Arabic, something no one expected to hear from a waitress. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The room went silent. The Mafia Don's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't move. The other Capos stared at her in shock, their mouths hanging open. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. A waitress, a woman they had all dismissed, had just silenced them with a language they hadn't even known she knew. The power shift was palpable. Dante Romano, the Don, a man who could command armies, was suddenly faced with something he had never expected, a woman who had just shown intellectual superiority in front of his men. The table was still. No one spoke. Lena stood there, unwavering. This was a moment none of them would forget. Its presence in the room had become undeniable. Dante Romano, the Mafia Don, stared at Lena with an intensity that made her heart race. His dark eyes held no anger, no hatred, but curiosity, a curiosity that was rare for a man like him. His silence lingered in the air, and every man at the table could feel the weight of it. The Mafia Capos, the powerful men who had spent their lives commanding respect and fear, found themselves rendered mute by a woman who had done nothing but deliver a simple, yet profound, response. The power in the room had shifted, but no one knew what would come next. Lena stood, her tray still balanced in her hands, her posture stiff, yet her mind was anything but steady. She was a waitress, a mere worker, just another face in the sea of the elite who passed through this restaurant. But in this moment, she was something more, someone who had spoken with authority, someone who had proven her own worth. Her heart thudded in her chest, the adrenaline rushing through her veins. She had never intended to make a scene, to draw attention to herself. But the look on Dante's face told her that she had done something she could not undo. For a long moment, The room remained still. The low hum of quiet murmurs seemed to creep through the walls as the men around the table exchanged glances, all wondering what to make of this woman who had just silenced them. Dante, however, did not take his eyes off her. He was a man who had built an empire, a man who had never been questioned, never been made to feel small. And yet, in the face of this woman, he found himself unsure. "You speak Arabic," Dante finally said, his voice low but tinged with something that was not entirely pleasant. Lena could feel her body tense. She had not expected him to speak to her directly. She had hoped this moment would pass, that the shock of her words would fade, and she would be able to return to her duties unnoticed. But now, her fate hung in the balance of this single moment. "I do," Lena replied, her voice steady but betraying the fear she felt inside. "I grew up with it." Dante leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Interesting," he muttered. The rest of the room was still, all of them waiting for something, an explanation, an apology, a response from their leader. But Dante was not interested in any of those things. His gaze shifted from Lena to his Capos, then back to her. The table seemed to grow even quieter, as if every person in the room could feel the tension rising with every passing second. "What else do you know?" Dante asked, his tone softer now, but still carrying that edge of authority. Lena blinked, caught off guard. She had expected to be dismissed, not interrogated. But there was no going back now. She had said what she had said, and now, she had to face the consequences. "Not much," she replied honestly. "Just a few things I've picked up over the years. Nothing that would interest you." Dante's lips curled into the slightest of smirks, but there was no humor in it. "We'll see," he said cryptically. Lena swallowed hard. She had no idea what he meant by that, but she knew that whatever was coming next would not be good. She had made a choice when she spoke up, but the consequences of that choice were beginning to unfold in ways she had never anticipated. Dante motioned for one of his men to approach, and the man stood up immediately, moving swiftly to his side. "Take her to my office," Dante ordered. "She's to stay there until I decide what to do with her." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the heat rise in her cheeks as she processed his words. The Capos at the table, who had once been the most feared men in the room, now seemed to be mere bystanders. "Wait," one of the men spoke up, his voice hesitant. "Dante, are you really going to? Do not question me." Dante cut him off sharply, his voice cold and unwavering. The man fell silent, immediately retreating back into his seat. "Move," Dante ordered, his attention back on Lena. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but her legs felt like lead as she followed the man toward the back of the restaurant. The further she walked, the more she realized the weight of the situation she was now in. This wasn't just a chance encounter. She had caught the attention of the Mafia Don himself. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. As they entered the private office, the door closed behind them with a soft click. Lena could feel the tension in the room thickening. The air was heavy, the room colder than she had anticipated. Dante's office was luxurious, with rich mahogany furniture and plush leather chairs that seemed to scream wealth and power. The Don stood by his desk, his back to her as he stared out the window. He didn't turn to face her immediately, but she could feel his presence, like a shadow that hung over her every move. Finally, he spoke without turning around. "Do you know who I am, Lena?" His voice was calm, but laced with the unmistakable undertone of authority. She hesitated for only a moment. "I know who you are," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that doesn't change anything." Dante finally turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I think it does." And with those words, Lena realized just how much her life had changed in an instant. The door to the office closed softly behind her, and Lena stood still for a moment, her back pressed against it. The weight of Dante's gaze was undeniable, as if it could pierce through her very soul. Her mind raced with questions, but she couldn't find the words. He had asked her to stay, to wait, and now that she was alone with him, the tension in the room felt suffocating. Dante stood by the window, his posture relaxed, but his expression unreadable. The view from his office was nothing short of impressive. The city sprawled beneath them, a symbol of the power and control he wielded. But even the grandeur of the city outside couldn't distract Lena from the situation she had found herself in. She had spoken up, and now, her fate was in the hands of the Mafia Don. Finally, After what felt like an eternity, Dante turned to face her. His dark eyes locked with hers, and the silence stretched between them. It was as if he was waiting for her to speak, to explain herself. But Lena wasn't sure what she could say. She had done nothing wrong. Yet here she was, alone in a room with the most dangerous man in the city. "Why did you speak to me like that?" Dante's voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made Lena's heart skip a beat. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breath. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble," she said quietly. "I just couldn't stand hearing the way they spoke to me." Dante's lips curled into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You didn't cause trouble, Lena. You did something most people would never have the courage to do. You stood up for yourself. And for that, I respect you." Lena's eyes widened slightly. Respect? From him? The Mafia Don? She had expected anger, maybe even punishment, but respect? It was a strange feeling, one that she wasn't sure how to process. "I didn't expect you to understand," she said, her voice a little firmer now. "I've been treated like nothing my whole life. I just wanted to show that I'm not." Dante took a step toward her, his gaze intense. "You're not nothing, Lena. I can see that." He paused, studying her for a moment. "And neither am I." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for the first time, Lena saw him in a different light. Not as a ruthless criminal, but as a man who, despite his power and influence, carried a burden of his own. "You speak Arabic," Dante said, his voice softening. "That's rare around here. But I can tell it's not just a language to you. It's part of who you are." Lena nodded, surprised by how perceptive he was. "It's part of my family. My father, he taught me. It's the only connection I have left to him." Dante's expression softened just slightly, though his eyes remained intense. "Family," he murmured. "It's a powerful thing." Lena could hear the quiet sadness in his voice, and for a moment, she could see a glimpse of something vulnerable in him, something she hadn't expected to find in a man like him. She wondered what it was that made him this way, this man who had everything, and yet seemed to carry such a heavy weight. "Why did you protect me?" Lena asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "You could have had me thrown out. You could have made a scene. But you didn't." Dante's lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. "I don't need to make a scene," he said simply. "I saw what you did. You weren't trying to defy me. You were trying to stand your ground. I respect that." Lena felt a surge of something, gratitude, maybe, or even awe, but she quickly pushed it aside. She wasn't sure what this man was after, and she wasn't about to let her guard down. "So what happens now?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. Dante regarded her for a long moment, as if weighing his options. "What happens now," he said slowly, "is that you stay here, in this restaurant, working for me." Lena blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "You'll stay in this restaurant, but I'm offering you more than just the job you have now," he explained. "I want you to be part of my team." Lena took a step back, her mind reeling. "Your team? I don't think I can work for you. I'm just a waitress." Dante's smile deepened, but there was no mockery in it, only a quiet understanding. "Everyone starts somewhere. You're more than a waitress, Lena. You've shown me that." Lena felt a mix of confusion and hesitation. She had no idea what he meant by his offer, or why he was offering it to her. She was just a woman who had stood up for herself. That was all. "What kind of work?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I need someone who can think for themselves," Dante replied, his tone serious. "Someone who won't back down when it matters. You've shown me you have that. You'll be more than just a waitress under my watch." Lena's mind raced. She had always dreamed of something more, something bigger than what she had. But this was something else entirely. She wasn't sure if she was ready for it. But she also knew that turning down an offer from a man like Dante Romano was not something most people got the chance to do. "I don't know," she said, the uncertainty clear in her voice. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this." Dante stepped closer to her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are. I wouldn't have said it if I didn't think you were." His words were calm, but there was something unwavering in them, something that made Lena feel like this wasn't a decision she could easily walk away from. The silence between them stretched on, and Lena realized that her life, in this very moment, was about to change forever. The silence in Dante's office grew thicker with every passing second. Lena stood still, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. His offer, his invitation, had been unexpected, but as he stared at her, his expression calm yet unreadable. She couldn't deny the truth that had been planted inside her. Dante wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her something much bigger, something far more dangerous, and something she had never dared to dream of. She was about to make a decision that would alter the course of her life, but was she ready for it? The fear that had been quietly growing inside her now blossomed. She was standing in front of the man who controlled not just this restaurant, but the entire city. Every man who sat at that table, every capo who obeyed his every command, was a reflection of his power. And yet, here she was, a waitress, offered a position within that world, a world she had never once considered entering. "You don't have to decide right now," Dante said, his voice steady, almost gentle, breaking through her thoughts. He stepped toward the desk, his fingers grazing the smooth surface as he leaned forward slightly. "Take some time. Think about it. You're not the first person to be invited into my world, but you are the first one to have earned it." Lena swallowed, her hands still trembling ever so slightly. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. The temptation to walk away from all of this, to turn her back on the chaos he was offering, was strong. But the pull of something greater, something beyond her own limits, kept her rooted to the spot. "What would I be doing exactly?" Lena asked, her voice steady but her mind racing. Dante looked at her with a hint of amusement in his eyes, but it was the kind of amusement that felt more like a challenge than a joke. "You'd be working directly for me, Lena. No more waitressing, no more hiding in the background. You'd have a role, a purpose. Your skills, your intelligence, they wouldn't be wasted." "Intelligence," Lena repeated, her brow furrowing. "I'm just a waitress." "No," Dante replied firmly, his eyes locked on hers. "You're more than that. You showed me that when you stood up in that room. You proved that you think for yourself, and that's the most valuable asset you can have in my world." Lena felt a flicker of something inside her. It was the first time in her life someone had seen her for who she truly was, someone who wasn't just a background character, someone who had something to offer beyond the surface. But the world Dante was offering was dangerous. She could feel that deep in her gut. "What kind of work are we talking about?" she asked again, her voice quieter now, as if trying to wrap her mind around the enormity of it. Dante leaned back in his chair, his gaze not leaving her. "You'll be handling sensitive matters. Things that require intelligence, discretion, and someone who can think under pressure." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know what she had expected, but this wasn't it. "I'm not a criminal," she said, more to herself than to him. "I never said you were," Dante replied smoothly. "But you'll be helping me protect what's mine. That's all I'll say for now. The rest will become clear as we move forward." The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. Protect what's mine. He wasn't just talking about the restaurant, or even the city. He was talking about something much bigger, his empire. "And if I say no?" Lena asked, her voice small, but not without strength. Dante's expression remained neutral, but the faintest trace of something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "You can walk away," he said, his tone chilling. "But if you do, you'll never be able to escape the life you've left behind. You'll always be looking over your shoulder, wondering if someone from my world is going to come after you." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. She knew what he meant. Once you entered Dante's world, there was no way out. There were no exits, no second chances. The life she had now, the one she had known for so long, would vanish. And in its place, there would be a new reality, one where loyalty, power, and fear dictated everything. It was a lot to process in such a short amount of time. But Lena knew she had already made her decision. She had no intention of walking away. She had always been a fighter, and the thought of walking away from something so immense, so life-changing, was not in her nature. "I'll do it," Lena said, her voice steady, even though her insides were churning. "I'll take the job." Dante's lips curled into a satisfied smile, but his eyes never softened. "Good," he said, his voice low and commanding. "You've just made the right choice. But remember, this world isn't for everyone. It's not for the faint of heart. You'll have to prove yourself, Lena. Every single day." He stood up, walking around his desk toward her. His presence seemed to fill the room, overwhelming and all-encompassing. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Dante's voice had dropped to a near whisper, but the intensity in it was unmistakable. Lena nodded, her heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. "I do," she said quietly. "I understand." Dante gave a nod of approval, his eyes scanning her once more before he turned toward the door. Good. Then let's begin. The days following her decision felt surreal. Lena had entered a world so different from anything she had known, a world that was as dangerous as it was intriguing. The restaurant, her former place of work, had become a mere stepping stone. Every moment she spent within Dante's inner circle felt like a test. A test she wasn't sure she was ready for. But she had made her choice. She was in, and there was no turning back. Dante's first order to her had been simple enough: observe. He wanted her to watch, to learn, and to understand the inner workings of his empire before making any major moves. At first, it seemed like a small task, but as the days went on, Lena began to understand the weight of what he had asked. She was to observe not just the employees, but the patrons, the Capos, and even Dante himself. Every movement, every word, every glance was an opportunity to learn something crucial. She had never realized just how much was happening beneath the surface of the Mafia's operations. One evening, a few weeks after she had agreed to work for Dante, she was stationed at the bar, as usual. The restaurant was bustling with activity, the clink of glasses and the low murmur of conversation filling the air. But tonight, there was something different. Dante was seated at the far end of the room, his usual entourage around him, but his demeanor was more tense than usual. Lena kept her distance, as instructed, but she couldn't help but watch. She had learned that when Dante was in the room, everyone was on edge. His presence alone could command respect, but tonight, he seemed more withdrawn than usual. The Capos around him whispered in hushed tones, their faces grim. It was the first time Lena had seen him so quiet, so still. A moment later, a man entered the restaurant, his face obscured by a dark hood. The tension in the room immediately escalated. Dante's eyes snapped to the door, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The man, who Lena recognized as one of Dante's most trusted associates, moved toward the back with quick, deliberate steps. Lena's pulse quickened as she followed the man's path. What was happening? Why the sudden change in atmosphere? She had been instructed to stay out of things, to watch. But tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something important was unfolding right in front of her. As she moved closer to the bar, her eyes locked with Dante's. He gave her a brief, almost imperceptible nod, signaling her to stay put. But she could tell that whatever was about to happen, it was serious. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of this world now. The man in the hood spoke briefly to one of the Capos, and then Dante stood. The atmosphere grew even heavier, if that was even possible. Every eye in the room was on him as he made his way toward the back, his steps purposeful and sure. Lena, without thinking, followed at a distance. Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of the scene unfolding. She reached the back hallway just in time to hear a raised voice. It was one of the Capos, his tone low but full of anger. "You can't just walk in here and expect us to follow your orders," the capo spat. Dante's voice, though calm, was unmistakably dangerous. "I don't need your permission," he said, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. "You either follow me, or you leave." There was a brief pause, and then the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the capo hesitated, clearly unsure of how to respond. But in the end, there was only one answer that mattered. The capo nodded, his pride clearly wounded, but he complied. "You're making a mistake," he muttered, his voice thick with resentment. "We'll see," Dante replied, his voice barely audible. "But this is the way it has to be." Lena watched from the doorway, her body tense with anticipation. What had just happened? She could feel the weight of Dante's decision hanging in the air, the ripples of his power spreading throughout the room. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was about loyalty, about who would stand by him and who would fall away. She had seen enough. The Capos had either made their choice, or they hadn't. But Lena knew she was a part of something much bigger now, something that was both thrilling and terrifying. Dante turned and walked toward the front of the restaurant, his posture relaxed, but his eyes still sharp with focus. He had made his point, and everyone had felt it. The room was quieter now, as if the storm had passed, but the tension remained. As Dante passed her, Lena's heart skipped a beat. He didn't acknowledge her directly, but she could feel the weight of his gaze as he moved past her. She had witnessed something tonight that would change everything. But the question remained. Would she be able to handle the power, the responsibility, and the risks that came with it? Dante had promised her a life she could never have imagined. But now, as the restaurant returned to its normal rhythm, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same again. The days following the tense meeting with Dante felt like a blur for Lena. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The weight of her decision to join him, to step into his world, was starting to settle in. The restaurant no longer felt like home. It felt like a distant memory. Each day, Dante's presence loomed larger over her, and as she spent more time in his orbit, the line between what she used to know and the reality she was now living in blurred. Her new role was clear: observe, learn, and adapt. But the more Lena saw, the more she realized how little she truly understood. Dante's world wasn't just about power. It was about control, loyalty, and ruthless ambition. That much became evident the night the first real test came. Lena was sitting at the bar, as usual, when one of the Capos approached her. His face was tense, his eyes darting around as if he were being watched. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "I need you to come with me. Dante wants to see you." Her stomach tightened, and she quickly stood, the sudden rush of adrenaline making her head spin. She had been with Dante long enough to know that when he called for you, it was never a casual request. It was always something important. She followed the capo through the winding corridors of the restaurant, her mind running wild with possibilities. What did Dante want now? Was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong? The capo led her into a back office, a place she had never been before. The room was smaller than Dante's, but it held a certain oppressive weight. Dante was standing by the window, his back to her as he looked out at the darkened city below. He didn't turn as she entered, but his voice was steady. "Come in, Lena." His words felt like a command. She stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "Sit down." He gestured toward a chair across from his desk. She sat, unsure of what to expect. The silence stretched between them, and Lena felt like she was waiting for something, but she didn't know what. Finally, Dante spoke. "There's a situation," he said, his voice calm, but there was a sharpness to it that made her nervous. "One of my associates has crossed a line. I need you to handle it." Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had expected to be asked to observe, to learn, but handle something? She wasn't sure she was ready for that. "Handle it how?" she asked, her voice betraying her uncertainty. Dante turned to face her, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "I need you to get information," he said. "I need you to make sure that everything he's been hiding comes to light. And if he refuses to cooperate, you'll make him." Lena swallowed hard. This was not what she had signed up for. She had expected a job behind the scenes, something that didn't involve direct confrontation. But she could see in Dante's eyes that this wasn't a request, it was an order. "Who is he?" she asked, her voice quiet, but steady. "One of my capos," Dante replied. "His name is Vito. He's been loyal to me for years, but recently, I've noticed discrepancies in his work. I need to know if he's playing me." Lena nodded, though a cold knot formed in her stomach. She had heard of Vito, a ruthless man who had built a reputation for being both efficient and cold-blooded. She wasn't sure how she was supposed to extract information from someone like that. "You'll meet him tomorrow night," Dante continued. "I'll arrange a time and place, and you'll be there. You'll know what to do." The calm certainty in his voice made Lena realize that there was no room for doubt. She didn't have the luxury of hesitation. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Dante gave a slight nod of approval, but his eyes never left hers. "Good," he said simply. "You'll prove your loyalty. And once you do, there's no turning back." His words echoed in her mind long after she left his office. The weight of what he had asked her to do settled heavily on her shoulders. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how much she had already changed. She wasn't just the quiet waitress anymore. She was becoming part of this world, a world that demanded loyalty and strength, no room for weakness. The next night, she was ready. She had dressed carefully, her outfit simple yet fitting for the occasion. She arrived at the location Dante had given her, a dimly lit warehouse on the outskirts of the city. As she stepped out of her car, the air felt colder than it had all week. She walked toward the entrance, her steps echoing in the empty space. Inside, Vito was waiting, sitting at a table with a drink in front of him. His face was as cold as she remembered, his eyes scanning her as she approached. "Lena," he said, his voice deep and flat. "I wasn't expecting you." She didn't answer immediately. She didn't know what to say. Instead, she took a seat across from him and met his gaze. The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. Finally, she spoke. "I'm here to ask you some questions." Vito raised an eyebrow, but he didn't seem surprised. "About what?" he asked. "About your loyalty," she replied, her voice steady. Vito's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in them. Doubt, maybe, or wariness. "You're asking the wrong questions, Lena," he said, his tone low and dangerous. Lena didn't flinch. She had been trained for moments like this. "I'm asking the right ones," she said quietly, "and you're going to answer them." The silence in the warehouse was thick, almost suffocating. Vito's cold gaze remained fixed on Lena as she sat across from him, unwavering. His posture was relaxed, but there was something in his eyes, a sharpness that hinted at the danger he posed. She had expected a confrontation, but not this. Not with someone so calm, so calculated. The dim light from a single overhead bulb cast long shadows on the walls, amplifying the tense atmosphere between them. Lena could feel the weight of the moment settling on her chest, but she didn't let it show. She had come here for answers, and she was going to get them, no matter what. "You're wasting your time," Vito said, his voice low but steady, as he took a slow sip from his glass. "You can ask all the questions you want, Lena, but you're not going to get the answers you're hoping for." Lena leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not here to play games, Vito. I'm here to find out the truth. And you're going to help me do that." Vito chuckled softly, the sound almost mocking. "You really think you can intimidate me, don't you?" he asked, setting his glass down on the table. "You're just a waitress, Lena. What makes you think you can do anything in this world?" Lena's jaw tightened, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not just a waitress," she said, her voice firm. "I'm someone who knows how to get what she wants. And I've learned that in this world, people who don't play by the rules don't last long. So you either answer my questions, or you make things a lot worse for yourself." Vito's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something dangerous flashing in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, studying her for a moment. "You're a bold one. I'll give you that," he said slowly. "But you're also naive if you think you're going to come in here and change anything. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Lena replied, her voice steady. "I know you're hiding something, and I'm going to make sure it comes to light." Vito's lips curled into a half-smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. But guts aren't enough in this business." He stood up suddenly, his movements smooth and deliberate. He walked over to the window, looking out at the dark city beyond. Lena's heart raced as she tried to figure out what he was thinking. Was he going to lash out at her? Or was he planning something else? "What if I told you I could make you a part of this world, Lena?" Vito's voice was quieter now, almost contemplative. "What if I told you that you don't have to be just a waitress anymore? You could be something more. You could have power, control." Lena's mind spun. This was the first time anyone had offered her something more than just a job. The idea of power, of control, it was tempting. But she couldn't let herself get distracted. She had a mission, and it was bigger than anything Vito was offering. "I don't want your power, Vito," she said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. "I want the truth, and I'm not leaving until I get it." Vito turned slowly, a dark smile playing on his lips. "You think you're in control here, don't you? You think you have the upper hand. But you're just a pawn, Lena. You're in deeper than you realize." His words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had been warned about the dangers of this world, about the games people played, but hearing it from him felt different. He was right about one thing. She wasn't in control. Not yet. But she would be. She had to be. "I'm not a pawn, Vito," she said, standing up now. "And I'm not afraid of you. So let's get this over with. What are you hiding?" Vito's smile faded, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow colder. He walked back to the table, his eyes dark with something that made Lena's skin prickle. "You really want to know?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Lena nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'm listening," she said. Vito's expression darkened, and he took a deep breath before speaking again. "Dante's been using you," he said, his voice low and steady. "He's been watching you, waiting for the right moment to pull you into his web. You're not just some innocent waitress. You're part of his plan, whether you realize it or not." Lena's blood ran cold. She had suspected something was off, but this was worse than she had imagined. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice shaking now. "What plan?" Vito leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. Dante doesn't trust anyone. He never has. And you're just another pawn in his game. He wants to use you to get what he wants, and then he'll discard you when he's done. Lena felt a rush of anger and betrayal surge through her. Dante, the man who had offered her a chance at something more, had been using her all along? It didn't make sense. But Vito's words had a ring of truth to them. She had to get to the bottom of this. How do you know all of this? She demanded. Vito's smile returned, but it was colder this time. Because I've been working for him longer than you've been alive. I've seen the way he operates. And I'm telling you, Lena, you're in way over your head. Lena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about this world, about Dante, was crumbling. But she wasn't going to back down now. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to let Vito, or anyone else, scare her into submission. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady. I'll decide my own fate. Not Dante, and certainly not you. Vito's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing more. The silence between them was thick with tension, and Lena knew one thing for sure. She was in the middle of something much bigger than herself. And she was going to find out what that was, no matter the cost. The tension in the warehouse hung heavy like a storm cloud, ready to break. Lena stood there, her pulse hammering in her ears, her body stiff with both fear and determination. The words Vito had spoken replayed over and over in her mind. Dante was using her. She was just another piece in his game, another pawn to further his empire. But Lena didn't want to believe it. She couldn't. The Dante she knew had offered her a chance at something better, something bigger. But now, after everything Vito had said, doubt crept in like poison. Was everything she had been told a lie? She had to find out. She had no choice. Lena stood in the cold silence, staring at Vito, trying to steady her breath. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her chest, threatening to crush her. But she refused to let him see her falter. You're lying, she said, her voice shaking but firm. Dante wouldn't do that to me. He's not like you. Vito's expression didn't change. He remained as cold as ever, his eyes dark and unreadable. You really think so? You really think he hasn't been using you all this time? He plays everyone, Lena. That's how he's built his empire. Don't be naive. Lena's heart dropped into her stomach, but she refused to back down. I know what I saw, she said, her voice rising now, the anger starting to boil over. Dante helped me. He gave me a chance when no one else would. He believed in me. Vito chuckled darkly, the sound sending a chill down Lena's spine. Believed in you, he repeated, his tone mocking. Don't kid yourself. Dante doesn't believe in anyone. Not really. People like him use others to get what they want. They don't form connections. They use fear, power, and manipulation to control the game. And you're just another piece on his chessboard. The word stung, but Lena refused to show it. She had to find out the truth for herself, no matter what it cost. What's your game, Vito? She demanded. Why are you telling me this? You want me to turn on him? Is that it? Vito's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm not telling you to turn on him. I'm telling you to wake up. You're playing a dangerous game, and you don't even realize it. You're going to get hurt, Lena. You're already in too deep. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had thought she understood the stakes of this world, but now she wasn't so sure. Was she really in too deep? Was there no way out? Her mind raced as she tried to process everything Vito had said. But before she could respond, the door to the warehouse creaked open. Lena froze, her heart skipping a beat. Dante stood in the doorway, his imposing figure filling the frame. He was calm, collected, his eyes scanning the room. Vito's smile faded, but he didn't make a move. Dante didn't even acknowledge him, his focus entirely on Lena. Lena, he said, his voice as steady as always. I think it's time we had a talk. Lena felt a rush of relief mixed with anxiety. Dante had come for her. But why? What did he want to say? She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but she had no choice. She had to face him, no matter what. I've heard a lot of things tonight, Lena said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. And I need to hear it from you. What's going on, Dante? What's the truth? Dante's eyes flickered for a brief moment, but his expression remained unreadable. He stepped into the room, his presence filling the space like a force of nature. The truth, he repeated, his tone almost amused. You want the truth? He paused for a moment, looking at her closely, as if weighing his next words. The truth, Lena, is that I've always been honest with you. But I've also had to protect you. Protect you from things you don't understand. Protect me, Lena repeated, the word tasting bitter on her tongue. From what? Dante's gaze softened slightly, but his voice remained firm. From this world. From the people in it. From the dangers you don't see, the ones you don't even know exist. I've kept you in the shadows because that's the only way I could keep you safe. The room seemed to close in on Lena as she processed his words. She had thought she understood. She had thought she knew what this world was about. But now, everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. You used me, Lena said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. You brought me in, gave me a job, made me believe in something. And it was all just part of your plan. I was just another pawn. Dante's face hardened at her words, but there was no anger in his expression. Only a deep, unreadable sadness. I didn't use you, Lena, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I brought you in because you were different. You had something I don't see every day. But you're right about one thing. You were part of my plan. You were always going to be part of it. But not because I wanted to use you. Because I wanted to protect you. And I needed someone I could trust. Lena stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know what to believe anymore. All the walls she had built around herself felt like they were collapsing. Dante took a step closer to her, his presence commanding but gentle. You don't understand the world I'm in, Lena. I've had to make decisions that no one else would ever understand. But everything I did to keep you safe. I did it to protect you from the world I live in. Lena's mind swirled, but the one thing she knew for sure was that the man standing in front of her had just broken through every defense she had built. She had thought she was in control, that she could handle whatever came her way. But now, she realized she had no idea what she had truly gotten herself into. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words, each one heavier than the last. Lena stood still, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Dante's words had shattered everything she thought she knew about him, about her place in this world. She had come to him for protection, for something better, but now she wasn't sure what to believe. He had told her that everything he had done, everything he had planned, was to protect her. But how could that be true if she had always been part of his plan? Was she just another pawn, a piece in his game of control and manipulation? Or had he truly meant what he said about protecting her, about keeping her safe from the dangers he faced every day? Her heart raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Dante watched her closely, his expression unreadable. He didn't press her for an answer. Instead, he gave her space, allowing her to process the weight of his words. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that the pieces didn't fit together. She had thought she understood the stakes of this world, but now she was beginning to realize how little she truly knew. I don't know if I can believe you, Lena said finally, her voice quieter than before. Everything's just too much. You say you're protecting me, but how can I trust that when I don't even know what's really going on? Dante's expression softened slightly, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his eyes. I understand why you're confused, he said. I've kept you in the dark about a lot of things, but I did it to keep you safe. The world I'm in is dangerous. People like me, we don't show our cards easily. We have to be careful. Every move we make. Lena's heart ached as she looked at him, torn between the man she had come to trust and the uncertainty that now clouded her thoughts. I didn't ask for this, she said quietly, her hands trembling at her sides. I didn't ask for any of it. I just wanted something better, something real. Dante took a step closer, his voice calm but firm. I gave you a chance, Lena. You're in this now, whether you like it or not. But you're not alone. I won't let anyone harm you. That's a promise. His words struck her like a punch to the gut. He was right. She was in this now. There was no turning back. The door that had opened to her was now shut, and she had no choice but to walk through it. But as she stood there, facing Dante, she realized that the truth was more complicated than she could have imagined. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about who she had become in this world, and whether she could still hold on to what mattered to her. I don't want to be part of your world, Dante, Lena said, her voice trembling with the weight of her decision. I don't want to be a part of all this. I just want to be myself. Dante's gaze darkened for a moment, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped back, his hands clasped behind his back. I understand, he said after a long pause. I never asked you to be part of this world. But you're already here, Lena. You're already part of it whether you want to be or not. And I can't protect you if you don't accept that. His words cut through her like a blade. The truth was, she didn't know how to live in this world, let alone survive in it. She had come to Dante for a better life, but now that life seemed more dangerous than ever. So what now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? Dante didn't hesitate. You prove your loyalty, he said simply. You show me that you can handle this world, that you can survive in it. And if you do that, then I'll help you make your way. But you have to make a choice, Lena. You can't have one foot in this world and one foot out. You're either in or you're out. The finality in his words echoed in her mind. She didn't have the luxury of indecision anymore. She had to choose. But how could she? She wasn't sure she was strong enough to make the right choice. She wasn't sure she even wanted to be part of his world. But the choice wasn't hers to make. Not anymore. Dante had given her a path, and now it was up to her to walk it. The room was silent, the weight of their conversation settling in the air between them. Lena felt like she was suffocating, trapped between two worlds she didn't belong to. She had always prided herself on being independent, on making her own choices. But now, everything felt out of her control. She didn't know what to do, what to think. The path ahead of her was unclear, and every step felt like a leap into the unknown. But there was one thing she knew for sure. She couldn't go back. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. I'll do it, Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante nodded, his eyes unreadable. Good, he said simply. You've made the right choice. But as Lena stood there, the weight of his words sinking in, she couldn't shake the feeling that the choice she had just made was going to change everything. Her life, her future, her very soul, were now bound to this dangerous world that Dante controlled. And she wasn't sure if she would ever find a way out. The next few days passed in a blur for Lena. The weight of her decision to stay in Dante's world weighed heavily on her shoulders, but there was no turning back. She had chosen to walk down this dangerous path, and now she had to prove she could survive in it. The days were long and filled with tasks she hadn't expected. Every move she made was scrutinized, every action analyzed. It felt as though there was no room for error, no space for weakness. Dante's presence, though often distant, was constant. His eyes always seemed to be watching, even when he wasn't physically there. Lena had always prided herself on being independent, but now, in this world, independence felt like a distant memory. She had to rely on Dante's judgment, his power, and his protection. It was something she wasn't used to, but it was the only way forward. One evening, a week after her decision to stay, Lena was summoned to meet with Dante in his office. She had become accustomed to the unexpected nature of his commands, but this time, there was something different about it. There was a sense of urgency in his tone when he spoke, and that alone made her anxious. She walked through the darkened corridors of the restaurant, her mind racing with possibilities. What did he want now? As she approached his office, the door was already slightly ajar. She hesitated for a moment before pushing it open and stepping inside. Dante was standing by the window, his back to her. The city lights below twinkled in the distance, but there was no warmth in the scene. Everything felt cold, distant, and impersonal. Lena, Dante said, his voice low but steady. Come in. We need to talk. She closed the door behind her, taking a step forward. What's going on? She asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her. Dante turned to face her, his eyes cold and unreadable. He looked as composed as ever, but there was something in his gaze that made her stomach tighten. I've received word of a threat, he said, his voice clipped. A threat to my business. To us. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't expected this. She knew the world Dante lived in was dangerous, but she hadn't imagined something so immediate, so personal. What kind of threat? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante's eyes flickered, his expression hardening. A rival family. The Grimaldis. They've been making moves against me, trying to undermine my business. I don't know how they've gotten so close, but I know they're planning something. Lena's mind raced. The Grimaldis. She had heard their name before, always mentioned in hushed tones, always with a sense of fear. They were one of the most powerful families in the city, and now they were targeting Dante? What do you want me to do? She asked, her voice tight with tension. Dante walked toward her, his steps deliberate. I need you to get information. We don't know how deep the Grimaldis have infiltrated, but we need to find out. I'm going to need you to. Get close to one of their people. Lena felt her heart skip a beat. Get close to one of them? She repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Yes, Dante replied, his gaze unwavering. I need you to be the one to gather the intel. I can't risk sending anyone else in. You've already proven you can handle yourself. You'll go undercover, work your way into their inner circle, and get the information we need. Lena stood frozen, her mind spinning with the implications of what he was asking. She had thought she understood what it meant to be part of Dante's world, but this was different. This was more than she had ever imagined. I'm not trained for this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm not a spy. I'm just a waitress. Dante's expression softened slightly, but there was no hint of doubt in his eyes. You've done more than you realized, Lena. You have the instincts, the ability to think on your feet. You're resourceful. That's why I need you. You don't need formal training to do this. You just need to trust yourself. The confidence in his voice sent a chill down her spine. Dante believed in her, but could she believe in herself? The thought of going undercover, of infiltrating the Grimaldis, terrified her. She had always been a part of the background, never the focus. But now, she was being asked to step into the spotlight and to play a dangerous game with one of the most powerful families in the city. I don't know if I can do this, she said quietly, almost to herself. Dante stepped closer, his voice low and steady. You can. I wouldn't ask you to do this if I didn't think you were capable. He paused for a moment, his gaze locking with hers. You're stronger than you realize, Lena. And I'm not going to let you fail. His words struck her like a wave crashing over her. For the first time since joining his world, she felt like she might have a chance. A chance to prove herself, not just to Dante, but to herself. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. What's the plan? She asked, her voice firm now. Dante smiled, though it was brief and sharp. You'll meet with one of their associates. Someone who works closely with the Grimaldis. Getting good with him, earn his trust. Then, you'll start gathering whatever information you can. The rest will come after that. Lena nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just a bystander in Dante's world. She was in the game now, and there was no turning back. The next few days were a blur of preparation and doubt. Lena had agreed to the task, but as she sat in the small, dimly lit room that had become her temporary refuge, she couldn't shake the weight of what was about to happen. She had always been an observer, a quiet figure in the background of life, but now, she was being thrust into the center of a dangerous world. A world she didn't fully understand, but one that would not show her mercy if she faltered. Dante had given her a plan, and now it was time to execute it. She was to meet with one of the Grimaldi family's key associates, someone who had been working for them for years. The meeting had been set up with a false pretext. She was to pretend to be just another interested party looking to work with them. She wasn't sure how much she believed in the plan, but she had no other choice. It had to work. As the night of the meeting approached, her nerves twisted inside her. She knew that if she didn't gain the trust of this associate, everything would fall apart. She had to blend in, to appear just like one of them. The Grimaldis were known for their ruthlessness, their ability to sniff out deception from miles away. The thought of facing one of them, of trying to deceive him, made her stomach churn. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't a professional spy or infiltrator. But Dante had chosen her. He believed in her. And somehow, she had to find a way to prove him right. The address Dante had given her led her to a building tucked away in the industrial part of the city. The area was quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional passing car. As she walked toward the entrance, her mind raced. Was she ready for this? Would she be able to keep it together, to keep her cool? She reached the door and knocked once. It was a small, simple gesture, but it felt like the weight of the world was behind it. The door creaked open, and a man in a dark suit stood there, his face impassive. He didn't say anything at first, just stepped aside to let her in. Lena followed him into a small, sparse room with nothing but a few chairs and a table in the center. The man gestured for her to sit. You're late, he said, his voice low and rough. I don't like waiting. Lena sat down, forcing herself to meet his gaze, even though every part of her wanted to look away. I apologize, she said smoothly, her voice steady despite the nerves threatening to betray her. I had trouble finding the place. The man didn't respond, just sat down across from her, his cold eyes studying her. She couldn't read him, couldn't tell if he was buying her story. But she couldn't let that shake her. She had to stay calm, had to act the part. "So, what do you want?" the man asked after a long moment of silence. Lena took a deep breath, her hands resting on the table in front of her. "I'm interested in doing business with the Grimaldis," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "I've heard that you're the people to talk to." The man's lips twitched into a half-smile, but there was no warmth in it. "You've heard right. But business with the Grimaldis doesn't come easy. We don't deal with just anyone. So why should I trust you?" Lena's mind raced, but she kept her face impassive. She had expected this question. The key was in how she responded, how she presented herself. She leaned forward slightly, letting her words carry weight. "Because I have something to offer," she said, her voice low, almost seductive. "I have access to certain people, certain information. I could help you with things that might be valuable to the Grimaldis." The man didn't react immediately, but his eyes flickered, just for a moment. That was enough. She had his attention. She continued, choosing her words carefully. "I know about some of the movements in the city," she said, her tone calm, but laced with authority. "There are things happening that could benefit your family, and I can help you get the upper hand." The man's eyes narrowed. "You think you can help the Grimaldis?" he asked, his voice laced with doubt. "I'm not convinced you're anything more than a little girl playing in a world she doesn't understand." Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let the insult show. "Maybe," she said, her voice cool and confident. "But I've been in this city long enough to know how things work. And I know how to make people listen." The man leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp. "You talk a good game," he said slowly, "but talk is cheap. Show me you're more than just a pretty face." Lena didn't flinch. She had expected this. The Grimaldis were known for their ability to test those who came to them. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small file. She slid it across the table to him, keeping her expression steady. "I've gathered information," she said simply, "on some of your rivals. I'm sure it will be useful." The man didn't take the file immediately. Instead, he picked it up slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He flipped through it, scanning the pages, his expression unreadable. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she waited. Was this enough? Would it be enough to gain his trust? Finally, he set the file down, his eyes still locked on her. "You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid," he said, his voice a little softer now. "But I'll admit, you've got my attention. You're in. For now." Lena's breath caught in her throat, but she didn't let herself show relief. This was just the beginning. She had made her first move, but she knew the real game was just starting. "Thank you," she said, her voice calm. "I won't disappoint you." The man stood up, signaling that the meeting was over. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice cool. As Lena left the building, her heart was still racing. She had made it through this first hurdle, but she knew that the real challenges were yet to come. Dante had warned her that there was no turning back once she stepped into this world. And now, more than ever, she realized just how true that was. The days following her meeting with the Grimaldi associate were tense, each one dragging by like a weight on her shoulders. Lena knew she had passed the first test, but there was still so much left to prove. Dante's words echoed in her mind. You're either in or you're out. She had chosen to stay in, to be a part of this world. But she had never imagined it would come with so many risks, so much uncertainty. As the week went on, she began to feel the weight of her decision more and more. The Grimaldi family had taken the bait. They were intrigued by what she had to offer, and now, she was becoming more involved with their operations. The more time she spent with them, the more she realized just how dangerous this world truly was. There were whispers of deals in dark alleys, transactions made under the table, and rivalries that ran deep within the city. No one could be trusted. The night she was summoned back to Dante's office, she knew it was time for the next step. She had done her part, gathering information, establishing herself as someone they could use. But what Dante wanted from her now, she wasn't sure. She had hoped, prayed even, that she could somehow avoid the darker parts of this life. But as soon as she stepped into his office, she saw the seriousness in his eyes. "Lena," Dante said, his voice low but urgent, "we need to talk." The air between them was thick with tension. She could tell something was off. "What's going on?" Lena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante stood by the window, his back to her. For a moment, he didn't say anything. The silence stretched between them, making her feel more and more uneasy. There's been a complication, he said finally, turning to face her. His gaze was sharp, calculating. One of my associates. He's been talking to the Grimaldis. He's been feeding them information. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She knew that the moment she stepped into this world, betrayal would be a constant threat. But hearing it so plainly, hearing that someone within Dante's inner circle had betrayed him, sent a chill down her spine. Who? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vito, Dante said, his voice cold. The one you've been meeting with. He's been working both sides. The name hit her like a punch to the gut. She had trusted Vito. He had seemed like an ally, someone who was on her side. But now, it was clear he had been playing a much bigger game, one that involved betraying Dante, and maybe even her. What do you want me to do? She asked, her mind racing. Dante walked toward her, his expression hardening. I need you to deal with him, he said, his voice calm but filled with authority. I need you to get him to talk. Find out what he's been telling the Grimaldis. And if he doesn't cooperate, his voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Lena's stomach twisted. You want me to kill him? She asked, the words feeling foreign as they left her lips. Dante's eyes met hers, and for a moment, she saw something she hadn't expected, hesitation. If it comes to that, he said softly, then yes. The weight of his words settled on her chest like a stone. She had known the stakes were high, but this was a step further than she had ever imagined. She had come into this world for a better life, but now, she was being asked to betray someone she had trusted, someone who had helped her. But that was the way this world worked. Betrayal was a currency. Trust was a luxury few could afford. I'll do it, Lena said, her voice steady, though inside, her heart was pounding. Dante nodded, his expression unreadable. Good. I knew I could count on you. He turned away, walking back toward the desk. I'll set up the meeting. You'll have everything you need. Lena stood there for a moment, her mind swirling with the enormity of what was about to happen. She had entered this world with a desire for something more, but now she was starting to understand just how far the cost went. She had already given up so much, her peace of mind, her sense of safety, her innocence. But now, she was being asked to give up her humanity. The idea of killing someone, of taking a life, made her stomach turn. But she knew that if she didn't do this, if she didn't prove herself to Dante, she would be just another pawn, another expendable piece in a game that had no mercy. She had to do it. For herself. For her place in this world. The night was long, filled with the weight of her thoughts. She knew that once she followed through with this, there would be no going back. There would be no escape from the decisions she made tonight. When the time came, Lena found herself standing in front of a dark, nondescript building. The meeting with Vito had been arranged quickly, and now, it was time for her to face him. She wasn't sure how it would go. She wasn't sure how far she was willing to push him. But as she walked toward the door, she realized something. This was the moment that would define her. This was the moment she either became part of the world Dante had offered her, or she walked away from it forever. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The warehouse was eerily silent as Lena stood at the entrance, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the point of no return. She had already crossed so many lines, and now, there was no way to go back. Vito was waiting for her, but she wasn't sure what kind of reception she would get. She had already set the stage with him, pretending to be someone interested in his business, but now the truth was about to unfold. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. Vito was seated at a table, as if expecting her, his expression cold and calculating. His eyes flicked up to meet hers as she approached. You're late, he said, his voice lacking any warmth. Lena remained composed, though she could feel the tension in the air, her every step heavy with purpose. I'm here now, she said simply, taking a seat across from him. Vito didn't waste time with pleasantries. You've been playing the game well, I see, he said, his gaze never leaving her. But now, it's time to see if you're really in this. Are you ready to prove yourself? Lena didn't hesitate. She had no choice but to play her part. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady, her hands folded in front of her. Vito leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her every word, her every move. You've gathered enough for Dante, haven't you? He asked, his voice low. You've been getting close to us, learning what you can. But do you really understand what you're dealing with? Lena's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. I understand more than you think, she said, her voice cold. And I'm not just doing this for Dante. I'm doing it for me. Vito's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. That's what I like to hear, he said. But there's something you should know, Lena. You're not the only one playing this game. She met his gaze without flinching. I know that, she said. But it's a game I intend to win. Vito's smile faded as he stood up and moved toward the window. The silence between them stretched on as he looked out over the city, his hands clasped behind his back. I've been watching you, he said, his voice low. You've got potential, but you've also got something that could get you killed. You're playing a dangerous game, and it's not one that's kind to beginners. Lena stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. I'm not a beginner, she said, her voice sharp. I've been in this game long enough to know how to survive. Vito turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. You think you know everything, but you're wrong. You don't know who's really pulling the strings. You don't know who you're really working for. Lena's mind raced, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm working for Dante, she said, though her voice faltered slightly. That's all I need to know. Vito took a step forward, his eyes intense. Dante may be the face of this operation, but he's not the one calling the shots, he said. There are people above him, people who have their own agendas. And you, Lena, you're just a pawn in their game. Her pulse quickened, but she refused to show fear. What are you talking about? She demanded. Who's above Dante? Vito's gaze flickered, and for a brief moment, she saw something like hesitation in his eyes. But then, he closed himself off again. You don't want to know? He said, his voice dark. Trust me, you're better off staying in the dark. But Lena wasn't about to back down. She had already made too many sacrifices, crossed too many lines. I need to know, she insisted. If I'm going to be a part of this, I need to know who's really in charge. Who's pulling the strings? Vito's expression remained stoic, but there was a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. He walked back to his desk, picking up a file and tossing it onto the table in front of her. Fine, he said, his voice low. But once you open that file, you'll be in deeper than you ever imagined. You won't be able to back out. Lena didn't hesitate. She picked up the file and opened it, scanning the contents. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw the names listed on the pages. Powerful families, influential people, names she had only heard in whispers. She felt a chill run down her spine as she realized just how deep she had gotten. The web she had stepped into was much bigger than she had thought. Vito watched her carefully, his face unreadable. Now you see what I mean, he said softly. This isn't a game anymore, Lena. This is real. And you've just made yourself a target. Lena closed the file slowly, her mind racing. She had made a choice, but now she understood just how dangerous that choice was. She was in this world, and there was no going back. The question was no longer whether she would survive, but whether she could rise to the top of it. And more importantly, who she would trust when the stakes were this high. She looked up at Vito, her resolve hardening. I'm not backing down, she said, her voice steady. I'm in this until the end. Vito's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. We'll see, Lena, he said. We'll see. In this gripping tale of love, loyalty, and betrayal, the lines between right and wrong blur as a woman is pulled into the dangerous world of crime. As she navigates the treacherous underworld, she is faced with impossible choices that could cost her everything. Romance stories often explore the complexities of relationships, but this one dives deep into the shadows, showing how even the most unexpected alliances can lead to powerful connections. As Lena finds herself drawn to a man who offers her a chance at something more, she must decide whether to trust her heart or her mind. The twists and turns of this story unfold with a tension that mirrors the complexity of romance stories, where characters must confront their deepest fears and desires. Through it all, Lena must navigate her own journey of self-discovery and make choices that will define her future. Romance stories like this challenge the notion of love and loyalty, pushing characters to their limits and testing their strength. As Lena's involvement with powerful figures deepens, she realizes that in a world filled with deceit, love is often the most dangerous game of all. What will happen when loyalty is tested and when hearts are torn between love and survival? This is a story that will leave you questioning everything as it dives into the murky waters of romance, power, and sacrifice. Romance stories often lead to an epic conclusion, but in this case, the end is just the beginning of something much darker.